The dimly lit room was silent, save for the low hum of a ceiling fan swaying lazily above. The walls were painted a dull shade of gray, but the flickering red accent light from a corner lamp gave the space an eerie glow. At the center of the room stood a coffin, polished mahogany. Its lid swung open to reveal the lifeless body of Femi, a man who even in death looked regal. Ade stood there, his lean frame cast in shadows, his hand shaking slightly as he brought a lit cigarette to his lips. He inhaled deeply, letting the smoke fill his lungs before exhaling a slow stream into the oppressive air. His dark eyes fixed on Femi's face. His older brother was dressed immaculately in a crisp white suit, hands folded on his chest, as though he were merely resting. Ade took another drag from the cigarette, his lips curling into a sneer. He stepped closer, the soles of his shoes clicking against the tiled floor. "Well, Femi," Ade began, his voice low and filled with bitter amusement. "Here we are. You, dressed like you're going to some grand party, and me, finally getting the chance to talk without you interrupting." He let the cigarette dangle between his fingers, ash threatening to fall onto the polished wood of the coffin. "I'll be honest, brother," Ade continued, his tone growing darker. "I've been waiting for this moment. Standing over you, watching you, helpless, silent." He chuckled humorlessly, shaking his head. "Do you know how long I've waited to feel free?" The room seemed to shrink around him as he paced back and forth in front of the coffin, his cigarette tracing faint lines of smoke in the air. "You were always the golden boy, weren't you? Femi the prodigy. Femi the perfect son. Mama's pride and joy." Ade spat the words like venom, glaring at the corpse. "And me? I was just Ade. The disappointment. The failure. Always in your shadow." He paused, leaning over the coffin to stare at his brother's peaceful face. "But now," he whispered, a sinister grin spreading across his face, "now that you're gone, I'll finally be the shining star of this family. Isn't it ironic? You worked so hard to be better than me, but in the end, it's your blood money that's going to pave my way to greatness." Ade's voice cracked with both anger and triumph. He took another drag from the cigarette, blowing the smoke directly into Femi's face. "You always acted like you were better than me. Better at school, better with women, better at life. But let's not forget how you got there, The deals you made, the people you crushed, the blood on your hands." He shook his head mockingly. "And Mama, she turned a blind eye to it all because you brought home the money. She'd kiss your cheek and call you her blessing." Ade chuckled, a deep, unsettling sound that echoed in the room. He bent closer, his face inches from his brother's. "But I know the truth, Femi. I know what you were. And now I'm the only one left to carry the family name." He straightened, his expression darkening. "Do you hear me, brother? You're gone. Dead. And I'm still here. I'm still standing." The cigarette burned dangerously close to his fingers, and Ade flicked it away carelessly, watching the embers die as they hit the tiled floor. He placed his hands on the edge of the coffin, leaning over Femi's still form. "Do you remember what you told me that day? The day you found me with your precious briefcase?" His voice was a low growl now, filled with years of pent-up rage. "You're nothing, Ade. You'll never be anything." He mimicked Femi's voice with a bitter laugh. "Well, look at me now, Femi. I'm the one standing. And you're just a memory." The door creaked open slightly, and Ade stiffened, his eyes darting toward the sound. A shadow loomed in the doorway. "Ade!" A voice called softly, hesitant. It was Mama. She stepped into the room, her frail frame draped in a black shawl. Her eyes, red from crying, scanned the scene before her. "Ade!" she repeated, her voice trembling. "What are you doing?" He straightened, wiping his face and forcing a neutral expression. "Just saying goodbye, Mama." She approached slowly, her gaze moving from Ade to Femi's body. Her lips quivered as she whispered, "He looks so peaceful, doesn't he?" Ade's jaw tightened. "Peaceful," he echoed flatly. Mama turned to him, her eyes filled with tears. "Your brother. He was a good man, Ade. A good son." Ade bit back a retort, his hands curling into fists at his sides. "Yes, Mama," he said through gritted teeth. She reached out, touching his arm. "Promise me, Ade. Promise me you'll take care of the family now. That you'll honor Femi's memory." Ade forced a smile, nodding. "Of course, Mama. "I'll do whatever it takes." But as he watched her turn back to Femi's body, murmuring a prayer under her breath, Ade's mind raced with dark thoughts. "Yes, Mama," he thought to himself. "I'll take care of the family. I'll take care of everything. And no one will ever know the truth about what happened to your precious son." He glanced one last time at Femi's lifeless face, a wicked smile tugging at his lips. The shadows in the room seemed to grow darker, as though they too were bearing witness to Ade's quiet triumph. The bar was quiet, save for the soft hum of conversations and the occasional clink of glasses. The earthy aroma of palm wine mixed with the faint scent of roasted bushmeat. Ade sat alone in a dim corner, his back to the room, cradling a gourd of palm wine in his calloused hands. The dim light overhead flickered, casting shadows on his face, but Ade didn't care. His mind was far away, lost in memories he wished he could forget. He took a sip of the palm wine, its sourness biting at his tongue. The taste brought no comfort, only a dull ache that seemed to settle deeper in his chest. He leaned back in his chair, his eyes staring blankly at the cracked wooden table in front of him. He was 10 years old again. The sun blazed high in the sky, and he sat on the worn steps of their small mud house, sweat dripping down his face. His stomach growled in protest, but he didn't dare complain. Mama had gone to a wedding in the next village, and he knew better than to expect anything when she returned. Hours later, she arrived, her geli tilted slightly, a sign of how much she had danced. Her hands were full of bags from the feast, and Ade's heart leapt. Maybe this time, she'd think of him. Maybe she'd save something for him too. "Mama, welcome," he had said, rushing to her side. "Ade, move out of my way," she said briskly, brushing past him. Femi, come and see what I brought for you." Femi, 15 and already the center of the world, strolled out of the house. His smile was broad as Mama handed him a plastic bowl, packed with steaming jollof rice, chicken and fried plantains. "Thank you, Mama," Femi had said, his voice warm and filled with gratitude. Ade stood there, waiting, hoping she'd reach into the bag and pull something out for him too. But she didn't. She patted Femi's head, her face glowing with pride. "You're my special boy, Femi. You deserve the best." "And me, Mama?" Ade had dared to ask, his voice barely a whisper. Mama glanced at him, her expression hardening. "What have you done to deserve anything, Ade? Femi is the pride of this family. Go and fetch water from the stream if you're hungry." Ade clenched his fists around the memory, his nails digging into his palms as he sat in the bar. He downed the rest of the palm wine in one gulp, the liquid burning its way down his throat. The next memory came unbidden, as they always did. He was older now, 13. Femi had just finished secondary school, and the house buzzed with excitement. Femi had dreams of becoming a lawyer, but the harsh reality of their poverty loomed over them. "There's no money for university," Mama had said one evening, her voice heavy with regret. Ade remembered sitting quietly in the corner, watching Femi's face fall. Something inside him twisted. Despite the bitterness, despite the resentment, Femi was still his brother. And so Ade made a decision. The very next morning, he went to Chief Okafor, the richest man in the village. The chief's compound was sprawling, his farm vast and demanding. Ade had knelt before him, his head bowed. "Chief, I want to work on your farm," Ade had said, his voice steady despite the fear. Chief Okafor had laughed, his belly shaking. "You small boy? Can you even hold a hoe? I'll do anything," Ade had replied, meeting the man's gaze. "I need money for my family." And so Ade toiled. Day and night he worked the fields, his hands blistered and raw. He hauled sacks of yams and cassava, waded through streams to plant rice, and endured the scorching sun without complaint. The money he earned, though meager, went straight to Mama. But no matter how hard he worked, it was never enough. He remembered the shame of returning home one evening, exhausted and empty-handed. Femi had been sitting on the porch, his shoulders slumped. "Did you get the money?" Femi had asked, his voice hollow. Ade shook his head. "Not yet, but I will. I promise." Femi had smiled faintly, patting Ade on the shoulder. "You're a good brother, Ade." The words should have comforted him, but instead they stung. Ade didn't want to be a good brother. He wanted to be noticed, to be valued. But no matter what he did, it was always Femi who shone. Ade slammed the empty gourd onto the table, the sound drawing a few curious glances from the other patrons. He ignored them, running a hand through his hair. Good brother, he muttered bitterly under his breath. And what did it get me? Nothing. Absolutely nothing. He gestured for another gourd of palm wine, his thoughts churning. Femi had taken everything. Mama's love, the family's hopes, even the little money Ade had worked so hard to earn. And yet, it was Femi who ended up in the coffin. Femi, whose wealth had come from blood money, while Ade scraped by in the shadows. As the bartender set down the fresh gourd, Ade leaned back, a grim smile playing on his lips. Well, Femi, he murmured to himself. Maybe I was the one who deserved to shine after all. The shadows in the bar seemed to shift, the air growing heavier. Ade drank deeply, his mind swirling with memories and plans. The past had shaped him, but the future, that was his to claim. The evening air was heavy, carrying the faint scent of rain that had yet to fall. Ade leaned against a wooden post outside the bar, a fresh gourd of palm wine in hand. He stared out into the fading light, the memories pressing down on him like the gathering storm clouds above. The land, the only land their family had owned. That cursed plot of earth. He closed his eyes, the past flooding back. He was 13 again, sitting under the mango tree behind their house, his fingers absently tracing patterns in the dirt. Femi sat beside him, his textbooks spread out, and his face serious. Femi's dreams were big, larger than the small mud house they called home. "I'll go to university," Ade Femi had said, his voice brimming with certainty. "I'll study hard, become a lawyer, and take this family out of poverty." Ade had nodded, his heart heavy with unspoken doubts. They were already struggling to afford the basics. How would Mama ever find the money for university fees? The answer came a week later when Mama called them both into the sitting room. Her expression was a mix of pride and resignation. "I've made a decision," she announced, her voice firm. "We're selling the land." Ade's heart sank. The land was their livelihood. It was where they grew cassava, yams, and vegetables. Without it, they'd have nothing. "But Mama," Ade had protested, his voice trembling, "what will we eat? How will we survive?" Mama turned to him, her eyes narrowing. "You'll survive, Ade. You're strong. But Femi's education is our future. He will lift this family." Femi said nothing, his eyes fixed on the floor. The sale happened quickly. Within days, the land was gone, handed over to a wealthy trader from the neighboring village. Ade had watched as the buyer's men uprooted their crops. The fertile soil soon left barren. "That land was your inheritance," Mama had said to Femi the night before he left for university. "You must make us proud." And so Femi left, his suitcase packed with new clothes and his heart full of ambition. Ade remained behind, his hands calloused from farm work and his stomach empty from the growing scarcity. He sipped his palm wine bitterly, the memory of those years cutting deep. The letters from Femi had started out frequent and hopeful, full of stories about campus life and promises of a better future. "I'll send money soon," one letter had read. "Things are tough now, but once I graduate, I'll take care of everything." But things didn't improve for Ade. He worked odd jobs, picking up whatever he could to keep food on the table. Mama's health began to deteriorate, her body worn down by years of hardship, but even then, her pride in Femi never wavered. When Femi graduated, the entire village celebrated. Mama slaughtered the only goat they had left for a feast, even though she had no idea how she would replace it. "He's a university graduate now," Mama had said, beaming. "Soon he'll be working in a big office in Lagos. He'll send for us. You'll see." Ade had wanted to believe her, but deep down he knew better. Months turned into years, and Femi indeed got a good job. He sent pictures of himself in crisp suits, standing next to shiny cars and fancy buildings. But the money never came. One day, Ade gathered his courage and wrote to Femi, explaining how tough things had become. He poured his heart into the letter, hoping his brother would understand. The reply came 2 weeks later, a short note scribbled on cheap paper. "Ade, I'm busy building my own life now. You'll have to fend for yourself. Ade had stared at the letter for hours, the words searing into his mind. He showed it to Mama, hoping for her support, but her reaction only deepened the wound. "Why are you always complaining, Ade?" she had snapped. "Your brother has responsibilities. He can't be thinking about you all the time. If you worked harder, maybe you wouldn't need help." Those words had echoed in his mind for years, fueling his resentment. Ade's hands tightened around the gourd of palm wine as he replayed that scene in his head. Mama, standing in the kitchen, shaking her head at him like he was nothing but a disappointment. "You're lazy, Ade," she had said, her voice dripping with disdain. "That's why you'll never be like Femi." He took another long sip of palm wine, the liquid burning as it went down. His jaw clenched as he remembered the humiliation. The nights he spent alone in the dark, wondering why he wasn't enough. And yet, despite everything, when Femi died, it was Ade who had been left to deal with the aftermath. He had been the one to arrange the funeral, to comfort Mama as she wept over the son she had idolized. Ade slammed the gourd down onto the table, the sound startling a few nearby patrons. He didn't care. The bitterness inside him was a storm that refused to settle. "You took everything, Femi," he muttered under his breath, his voice low and venomous. "The land, Mama's love, the family's hope. And now, even in death, you haunt me." He stood up, swaying slightly as the alcohol coursed through his veins. The bar seemed too small, too suffocating. He needed air, needed space to think. As he stepped outside, the rain finally began to fall, a slow drizzle that quickly turned into a downpour. Ade tilted his face to the sky, letting the water wash over him. But no matter how hard it rained, it couldn't cleanse the bitterness that had taken root in his soul. The room was dimly lit by a single kerosene lamp, its weak glow casting long shadows on the cracked walls. Ade sat on the edge of his wooden bed, holding Femi's necklace in his trembling hands. The simple chain was adorned with a small red cloth tied around it, the charm that marked its history now loaded with a darker purpose. His gaze fixated on the necklace, and his thoughts drifted back to the fateful day he had sealed his brother's fate. It had been 3 months ago, yet it felt like yesterday. It was a humid afternoon when Ade first met Taeyo in the bustling streets of Lagos. Taeyo was a man of obvious wealth, with his gold wristwatch gleaming in the sunlight, and his air of nonchalance as he tossed bundles of naira to vendors. Ade had admired him from a distance before summoning the courage to approach. "Taeyo," Ade had greeted, forcing a smile as he extended a hand. "It's been a while since we last saw each other." Taeyo had looked at him with mild interest, then burst into a hearty laugh. "Ade, the village hustler. What brings you to this part of Lagos? Still struggling, I see." Ade's cheeks burned, but he swallowed his pride. "I need advice, Taeyo. I need what you have: wealth, influence, freedom from this life." Taeyo had studied him, his smile fading. "It's not easy, my brother. The kind of wealth you see doesn't come without a price. Are you ready to pay that price?" Ade nodded without hesitation. "I'll do anything." Taeyo's smile returned, sharper now. "Good. Then I'll introduce you to Baba Power." The visit to Baba Power's shrine had been a blur of unease and dark rituals. The small, secluded compound reeked of incense and burned offerings, the air thick with an oppressive energy. Baba Power himself was an old man with milky white eyes and a voice that seemed to echo even in silence. "You desire wealth, boy?" Baba Power had asked, his tone both mocking and commanding. "Yes, Baba," Ade had replied, his voice steady despite the fear clawing at his chest. "Then you must understand," Baba continued, leaning forward. "Wealth does not come freely. You must sacrifice something of great value, something that ties to your bloodline. Only then will your stars align with riches." The room had fallen silent, and Ade's heart had raced. The enormity of the decision loomed over him like a storm cloud. "A family member," Baba Power clarified, his voice cold. "The stronger the bond, the greater the sacrifice, and the richer you will become. Choose wisely." In that moment, Ade's thoughts had gone straight to Femi, his brother, the golden child, the favorite, the one who had taken everything. He didn't hesitate. "Femi," he said, his voice steady. Baba Power smiled, a sinister grin that revealed his decaying teeth. "Good. Bring me something he wears often, something that carries his essence. The rest will be done." The memory burned fresh in Ade's mind as he clutched the necklace tighter. He had taken it from Femi's room the next day, feigning interest in borrowing it. Femi, as always, had been too trusting. "Take care of it," Femi had said with a small smile. "It's my lucky charm." The irony was cruel. Ade had returned to Baba Power with the necklace, his resolve unshaken. The ritual that followed was a blur of chance, blood and fire. When it was done, Baba Power had placed the red cloth around the necklace, binding it with the spell. "It is done," the old man had said, his tone final. "Your brother will not see the next full moon. And you, my son, will rise." And rise he had. Within weeks, its fortunes began to change. A chance encounter with a businessman at the bar led to a lucrative contract. Land deals fell into his lap, and his reputation grew as a man of influence and power. But the wealth came with a price, just as Baba Power had warned. Femi's death had been as mysterious as it was sudden. He had fallen ill one evening, complaining of a sharp pain in his chest. By morning he was gone, his face serene in death as though he had simply fallen asleep. The village mourned him deeply, but Ade felt only a hollow satisfaction. He had finally stepped out of Femi's shadow, finally claimed the life he believed he deserved. Yet, as he sat in his dimly lit room, the necklace in his hand, a strange unease began to creep over him. The weight of his actions pressed heavily on his chest, a nagging guilt he couldn't shake. Was it worth it? He muttered to himself, his voice barely above a whisper. The room seemed to answer with silence, the shadows on the walls twisting and dancing as the lamp flickered. Ade shook his head, dismissing the doubt. Of course it was. Femi had everything handed to him. He didn't deserve it, but deep down he knew the truth. He had crossed a line that could never be uncrossed, bound himself to a darkness that no amount of wealth could erase. He placed the necklace back in its small wooden box, closing it with trembling hands. As he did, he couldn't help but feel the room grow colder, the air heavier, as though the walls themselves were closing in on him. For all his newfound riches, Ade couldn't escape the chilling realization that his brother's death had left a shadow over his soul, one that no amount of wealth could ever lighten. The city bustled with life as Ade stepped out of his gleaming black Mercedes-Benz, his leather shoes clicking against the paved driveway of his car dealership. The bright neon sign above read, "It's Auto Empire," a testament to his meteoric rise. Rows of shiny cars gleamed under the sun, from sleek sedans to luxury SUVs, their polished surfaces reflecting the success Ade had cultivated. Standing at the heart of his empire, Ade basked in the admiration of his customers and employees. His business had blossomed seemingly overnight, each month bringing in new contracts and high-profile clients. The wealth flowed in streams, and Ade wasted no time sharing the spoils. It was during one of his visits to Lagos that Ade met Jumoke. She was a strikingly beautiful woman with deep brown eyes and a sharp wit that disarmed him the moment she spoke. They had met at a friend's party, and Ade, in his tailored suit and confident demeanor, had easily caught her attention. "Mr. Ade, the man of the hour," she teased when they were introduced, her smile disarming. "Do you sell cars or charm for a living?" Ade chuckled, impressed by her boldness. "I suppose I could sell both if it means winning your attention." Their courtship was swift. Jumoke admired his ambition and generosity, while Ade was drawn to her elegance and intelligence. Within months, they were married in a grand ceremony that had the entire village buzzing. Ade's newfound wealth transformed not just his life but also his mother's. "Mama, you'll never need to worry again," Ade had promised her one evening as they sat under the mango tree in the village compound. The sun was setting, casting an orange glow over the old house that had once been their home. "I'll make sure you live like a queen." And he did. The first thing Ade did was rebuild their family house. The once crumbling mud walls were replaced with modern brickwork, the thatched roof exchanged for sleek aluminum sheets. He furnished it with imported furniture, installed a generator to ensure constant electricity, and even built a borehole for clean water, a rarity in the village. His mother, who had once struggled to feed her children, now became the envy of her peers. She no longer wore faded wrappers or walked barefoot to the market. Ade lavished her with expensive clothes, gold jewelry, and a brand new phone she barely knew how to use. "Ah, Ade, my son," she often boasted to anyone who would listen. "God has truly blessed me with a star. See how he has lifted this family." The neighbors whispered about her good fortune, some with admiration, others with envy. Women who had once mocked her now sought her advice, and men who had looked down on her family now greeted her with deep bows and wide smiles. Back in the city, Ade's car dealership thrived. His business acumen was unmatched, and his connections in high places ensured a steady stream of customers. Politicians, celebrities, and wealthy businessmen flocked to him for their automotive needs, each transaction adding to his growing fortune. "Ade, you're becoming a legend," one of his business associates remarked during a meeting. "What's your secret?" Ade smiled, his tone light. "Hard work and blessings from above." But deep down, he knew the truth. His success was built on blood, and the thought of Femi's death lingered at the edges of his mind, like a shadow he couldn't escape. At home, Jimok quickly adapted to her role as the wife of a wealthy man. She hosted lavish dinners, attended charity events, and became a fixture in the social circles of the city's elite. "I'm proud of you, Ade," she told him one evening as they sat in their sprawling living room, the city lights twinkling through the floor-to-ceiling windows. "You've built something incredible. Our future is bright." Ade nodded, sipping his glass of whiskey. "It's only the beginning," he replied, though a flicker of unease crossed his face. He had everything he had ever wanted: wealth, status, and a family of his own. Yet, the price he had paid for it all weighed heavily on his conscience. He could see the adoration in his mother's eyes, the love in Jimok's smile, and the admiration of his peers, but none of it could drown out the whisper of guilt that haunted him at night. Still, Ade pressed forward, convincing himself that the ends justified the means. After all, wasn't he fulfilling his destiny? Hadn't he proven that he was more than just a shadow in Femi's light? As his business empire grew, and his mother basked in the glory of her transformed life, Ade told himself that he had made the right choice. Yet, deep within, he couldn't ignore the feeling that his newfound happiness was built on a fragile foundation, one that could crumble at any moment. The night was quiet, the darkness broken only by the headlights of Ade's luxurious SUV cutting through the narrow, deserted road. He sat in the back seat, a small smile playing on his lips as he scrolled through his phone. Ade had just returned from a business trip abroad, where he had sealed a multi-million-naira deal. His life, he thought, couldn't be more perfect. His driver, Tund, hummed softly to a tune on the radio, navigating the winding road with ease. It was late, and the city was still an hour away. Ade glanced at his watch, eager to return to the comfort of his home and the arms of his wife. But fate had other plans. It happened so fast. Out of nowhere, a large truck blocked the road ahead. Before Tund could react, several masked men emerged from the shadows, armed with AK-47s. "Stop the car," one of them shouted, his voice cutting through the stillness of the night. Tund slammed on the brakes, his hands trembling. Ade's heart raced as he tried to make sense of the situation. "Stay calm," Ade muttered to his driver, though his own voice quivered. The men surrounded the car, their guns trained on it. One of them smashed the driver's window with the butt of his rifle, dragging Tund out with brutal force. "Step out," another yelled, pointing his weapon at Ade. Ade hesitated, his mind racing for a way out, but he knew resistance was futile. Slowly, he opened the door and stepped out, raising his hands in surrender. The men shoved him into the back of their truck, binding his hands and blindfolding him. The sound of the SUV's tires screeching as it was driven off echoed in his ears. Hours later, Ade found himself in a dimly lit room with rough walls and the stench of dampness. His blindfold was removed, revealing the masked men standing before him. "You're Ade, the big businessman," their leader said, his voice deep and menacing. "We know who you are, and we know how much you're worth. If you want to live, you'll pay us." Ade swallowed hard, trying to maintain composure. "How much?" "Everything," the leader replied, his tone cold. "Your cars, your businesses, your bank accounts. All of it." Ade's heart sank. Everything. He had worked, or so he told himself, so hard to build his empire. To lose it all in one night was unthinkable. But as he stared down the barrel of the leader's gun, he knew he had no choice. "Fine," he said through gritted teeth. "I'll give you what you want." Over the next 2 days, Ade's wealth was systematically drained. The bandits forced him to call his associates, transferring money from his accounts, signing over properties, and relinquishing his businesses. They took everything, leaving nothing behind. Once their demands were met, Ade dared to hope they might let him go. But deep down, he knew better. On the third night, they dragged him out of the room, blindfolding him again. "Where are you taking me?" Ade asked, his voice trembling. "Don't worry," one of them sneered. "You'll find out soon enough." The car came to a sudden stop on a desolate stretch of road. Ade was pulled out, the blindfold ripped off his face. He blinked against the harsh glare of the car's headlights, his heart pounding in his chest. The leader stepped forward, his gun in hand. "We can't leave loose ends," he said simply. "No," Ade screamed, falling to his knees. "I gave you everything. Please." But his pleas fell on deaf ears. The gunshot rang out, shattering the silence of the night. Ade's lifeless body crumpled to the ground, the blood pooling beneath him, a stark reminder of the price he had paid for his wealth. The bandits drove off, leaving him by the side of the road, his once glorious life reduced to nothing. News of Ade's death spread quickly. His body was discovered the next morning by a passing truck driver who alerted the authorities. When the police arrived at his home to deliver the news, his family was plunged into despair. Jumok wailed uncontrollably, clutching their young son as tears streamed down her face. Ade's mother, once the proud matriarch of the family, was inconsolable, her cries piercing the air. "My son," she sobbed. "What kind of evil is this? What kind of curse has fallen upon us?" The village mourned him, though whispers of karma circulated among those who knew of his rise to fortune. Jumok tried to piece together the remnants of their lives, but with Ade's wealth gone and his businesses seized, she was left with nothing. The family that had once stood at the pinnacle of success was now brought low, a cautionary tale of greed and ambition.